So this week our news team traveled to South Carolina's Grand Strand, where a surprise development in the case of Mica Miller unfolded, a settlement between Miller's family and John Paul Miller and the Solid Rock Church, where he is the pastor. Now, this settlement is a global agreement encompassing all actions and all parties to this case. So it is a significant development, not one without controversy, however. But before the settlement was reached, literally just hours before, our media outlet sat down to conduct an interview with the lead attorney for the Francis family, Mica Miller's family, Regina Ward. Here in its entirety is that conversation. Attorney Ward, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today. I know it's a big day. In fact, there's a hearing on this case today. As we're taping this, you're preparing for this hearing in Horry County Probate Court. I wanted to ask you, before we get into the details of this massive case, which we can see here the work your office is putting into it, I wanted to ask you, you were representing Mica. You were talking to Mica in the days, in the weeks leading up to what happened back in April. Can you tell us anything about those interactions, about her state of mind, her frame of mind? Everything we've been shown indicates a woman who was looking forward, who was excited about this new life that she was embarking on. Can you tell us just anything about her demeanor during those days?
Oh yes, absolutely. And what you just said is exactly the impression that I got. In fact, she sat pretty much in that chair you're sitting right now in one of our interactions and talking about it. And she was so happy that she shared with me that she felt that she'd finally found what God's calling was for her life, which was basically the missions, the children in Africa, and education for children who are deprived of an appropriate education. She was, let me just say, ecstatic, and it was uplifting to hear her talk about it and to see her so happy about it. And she most assuredly was of, there was no indication of anything, remotely close to a severe depression or anything like that. Of course, anyone that goes through a divorce or separation or an ending of a marriage, there is always, what we call situational depression. In other words, this situation is making me sadder than most. But she was taking responsibility of making sure that she was addressing that with the appropriate therapist and her medical doctor. So I was so happy for her because she had finally reached a place where she was done and she was ready to move on, and she just didn't want to fight anymore.
Mm-hmm. You talked about that plan that she had for her life, the mission work. How central to Mica Miller was faith?
It was the core and the soul of her. Whenever you met Mica, you just felt like you were pulled into the joy that the spiritual word, the Word of God, and the teachings of Jesus were principles that she was drawn to, that she was wanting to really abide by in every way possible. And then, which kind of reminds me of what I thought about at one point after her death was that I know that she was really, really, really struggling with this, I guess, sort of a contradiction, but not really, in the Word of the Bible. And she actually made some videos touching on this. And one thing was, God hates divorce. God hates divorce. So what that means is when you're in a marriage is you're supposed to do the work to try to prevent that. She also talked about, forgiveness and praying for our enemies. And when someone does something wrong, is not honest in their dealings with you, or they've said or done something that may hurt you, that you're supposed to be Jesus-like and forgive that person. And not only forgive that person, you're to pray for them. So now you have, and then the other principle is the principle of being an obedient spouse as a wife. You know, and the religious teachings that she followed is that the man is the head of the household, and the wife should be subservient to him. But there's a flip side of that. In order for the man to gain his wife, you know, being subservient or to following his lead and guide, is that the Bible also says that you treat your wife as the bride of Christ, and you're supposed to protect her and do, you know, all that you can to make sure that she flourishes and is nurtured. So she had this difficulty in reconciling. I have a duty as a spouse to follow the lead of my husband, and to do the things that he asked me to do, and she did, even the terrible things.
She was also zealously protective of the church, of the Christian faith.
Absolutely.
She didn't want what was transpiring in her life to turn people off to faith, to attending church, and in fact, you
Correct.
can even argue that she perhaps endured some of this that perhaps no one else would have, because she didn't want people to be turned off or steered away from faith. You think that was...
That absolutely was important to her. She would make the comment or statement that church is not a person, the church is not the man, the church is not the pastor, the church is the people. She absolutely loved that church. She did everything that she could to try to protect the church. She didn't want the church or the congregation, the members, to take this sort of situation and lose their faith. It was incredibly important to her that not interfere. And I think she did a video where she talked about, she apologized for having to keep her circle kind of small, you know, at this time. And that was for a number of reasons. But at the same time, it was like, you know, please continue to believe in God and have your faith and say your prayers and, you know, continue to live and abide by the teachings of our Bible.
It's amazing to see someone be able to do that when they are the subject of this relentless manipulation and mischaracterization, kind of like a inside the church smear campaign being waged against her.
Yes.
Yet she continued to do her best not to cause believers to stumble, basically.
Correct. She was, I would say she was self-sacrificial, that she was willing to sacrifice herself in order to preserve and protect the followers of the Word, that they would not get distracted by the fallible man that may be associated with it. That is not what brings you to church. What brings you to church are the teachings of God and what Jesus, what he represented in this world. And so that was critically important to her to protect that. And I think to some degree, maybe to her own detriment, in that she endured things for a longer period of time, hoping and praying, just like the teachings were, you know, be an obedient wife. That means don't go against your husband, you know, be a good Christian, and that you forgive your enemies. Someone's doing bad, terrible things to you, you're still supposed to forgive them and pray for them. You know, and at the end, when she finally reconciled, I feel like that, you know, God does not want you to stay in marriage just because he hates divorce. God hates abuse. God hates abuse. And just like she said, what do you think that God thinks about that? What do you think he would do about that? In other words, she was laying, you know, what was happening to her. She did not want to be vindictive and lash out and, you know, smear him. She would not allow me as the attorney. What I wanted to do was put a lot of this in the pleadings, you know, and she did not give me permission to do that. She said, I don't want that to happen. I just want to be separated. I just want this to stop. I just want to move on with my life. And at the end of a year, I'll get the divorce. And of course, it didn't quite work out that way. And I wish that she would have let me put some of those things in there. But at the end of the day, what it was is she wanted to still protect her husband, okay? She definitely wanted to protect the church, the name of the church, the congregation, and everything. And she didn't want to use that. She had everything she could have used in that situation and chose not to. She said that God doesn't want me to be vindictive. God doesn't want me to lash out. And at the end of the day, what she was referring to is God is the one who will judge, and God is the one who will punish.
She's got that right. Let me ask you this. You talked about that way forward, that future for her that she was embracing. You said that she'd reconciled herself.
Yes.
We've all seen that Ring camera footage from the day that she died.
Yes.
And I've watched it probably a dozen times, and I see
So have I.
A woman on her way to work, leaving at the time that she would leave to go to work.
Yes.
Starting to get into that new routine of this new chapter of her life. Obviously something happened after she walked away out of the view of that camera. Something happened between then and the 911 call that was placed
Correct.
at the Lumber River Park up in North Carolina. Let me ask you this question. What do you think happened that day?
Well, of course, anything that I would think is speculation, and that is the million-dollar question. I personally believe that answer to that, or some form of answer to that, will be on that cell phone or that Apple Watch that is in the possession of the legal authorities. And so we have a court order requiring those things to be released to my office, and they won't release it until they have finished their, quote, investigation, all legal authorities. And so I'm hoping that when I get my hands on those things, that may hold the answer. But I also, from a theoretic sort of a, stance, is that Mr. Miller was very consistent in his contact with her. He's even made comments in other news agencies and so forth that he sent her 6 or 7 emails. I haven't got my hands on those yet. He made comments that he sent emails to her on the same day that she died, and then realized that there were 2 that she probably didn't get. There are a couple of things that don't add up. There are 2 specific things that he said that were so contradictory, and there's outside evidence to prove it and to sustain what I'm thinking about particularly. But I would say that I would not be surprised if he made some form of contact with her, because you have to remember that I served...
On the day she died?
Yes. You have to remember that I served him the separation papers on that day. So he had made a comment to me specifically that, gosh, something must be really wrong because Regina Ward has been hired on the case. And we know nobody gets Regina Ward unless it's a big case. And I was like, okay, well, we're not making a big deal out of it. We're just pursuing a separation. So I would not be surprised if he did not start at that moment, the second that he got served, to start berating her with either phone calls or leaving her messages or texting her. Basically he weaponized the Bible against her, and I would not be surprised if that happened.
Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned that weaponization of the scripture, isolating her from family, from friends, the tactics of this man and the totality of this abuse,
Yes.
Harassment, stalking, and it wasn't just Mica, was it? There are others who have fallen victim to John Paul Miller, aren't there?
It appears to be. There's definitely a pattern that seems to have emerged here. Whenever you put everything together, it is a consistent pattern that's not only, consistent to what Mr. Miller himself has done. But I've been practicing law for almost 20 years, and even though I'm a general practitioner doing, family court, criminal, and personal injury, probably more than 50% of my clients are in the domestic arena. And of that 50% of those clients, I would say probably nearly 50% of those are always coming in complaining about narcissistic tendencies of their spouse, controlling tendencies of their spouse. They all seem to have the same types of complaints. He took my credit cards, he cut up my credit cards, he turned off my phone, he took my phone, he changed the password on my computer. All of these things that just keep backing and boxing a person in. And it's very prevalent, and it's been overlooked for far too long.
And we're going to talk about some of this as we get into the coercive control angle of this and the potential for legislation here in South Carolina that could enhance the current domestic violence statutes. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you this about the current state of play as it relates to the civil cases that are currently pending, custody, probate, but also the potential for additional civil actions, whether from the Francis family, from potential other victims. Walk us through sort of the overview of the lay of the land civilly.
Sure. I do need to straighten out something with the family court case. While Mr. Miller mentioned that they would go pick up the children every single day, they did not have children together. Those were children from his prior marriage. I would be surprised that he would have them every day. Usually there's a custody schedule. But anyway, the family court matter is pending to address a division of the marital estate. And so there are no custody issues. It's also not a divorce. In the state of South Carolina, you can't get a divorce unless you have grounds. Mica certainly had grounds. She had grounds for physical cruelty. She had grounds for adultery. And she chose not to go that route. So it's a family court proceeding. The reason that it's pending now is simply to divide the marital estate and get that part, that was hers. The other action that is pending, of course, is the probate case. And the probate case, of course, is going to deal with her estate. And generally, if a person dies with the will, then her estate would have been distributed pursuant to her wishes in the will. So there was no will, and because of that, it's going to be divided pursuant to the statutory provisions, which usually says if you're married, it goes to your spouse, and if you're married and have children, it's divided between the two, etc. So basically, the point of that is that he's trying to become the personal representative of the estate, while Sierra is serving as what we call the special administrator of the estate. And so her duties are to collect, the property that may belong to the estate, to pursue particular litigation. At that time, it was specifically for the marital litigation so that we could keep that going and it, not be dismissed. As far as any other actions, I've been retained for the civil action. The civil action could include multiple types of things or actions, in my opinion. There may be some folks that would disagree with me, but I think that there's a potential wrongful death case that it's, there's not really much on point for that. So I think that it's maybe a novel issue that I'm certainly willing to take up in this case. I can't think of a better fact pattern than this one.
I was about to say, if there's a case that's going to test that theory, this would be it.
It would be it. Also, the other thing that I feel like is a very strong case is called intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is a legal cause of action, a tort claim, that exist on the books in the state of South Carolina. And there is indisputably enough evidence to support that as well. We also think of assault, and we also think of battery. Okay, most people think of those terms in criminal terms, but it also exists in the civil world. So we can sue for assault, that is, placing a point of fear into someone. There's also a battery, civil battery, and that is an unwanted touch, which we have evidence of that too. So those are some of the civil actions that could be proposed. The other thing is I believe that Mica was underpaid by the church. So she certainly was not a volunteer because she was paid. She had 7 or 8 positions that were all sorely underpaid. If you extrapolated one of those positions, for instance, I think it was the media director, the range of salary is somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 a year. So I think that there may be a claim against the church for underpayment of wages.
I want to shift gears to the criminal side of this. There have been reports, several media outlets here on the coast, national outlets as well, have reported that there's a federal component to this investigation beyond the Robeson County investigation into Mica's death. We've also been told that there are investigations related to other potential victims of John Paul Miller. Let me ask you this. What can you tell us from your perspective about any potential criminal investigations into John Paul, and are any of your clients cooperating with those?
Right. So one of the things that I have said over and over is basically, for instance, I have an order stating that Mica's personal property, when the legal authorities are finished with their investigation, that it'll be returned to my office. I have sent a couple of letters to the Robeson County Sheriff's Department saying, hey, I have an order, give us the stuff, because you've completed your investigation from what we understand, right? You have your findings. So they denied the request, said they were not going to release the property at this time, that basically, the FBI had called in the FBI, and at this point they're not going to release the property. They wouldn't tell me specifically why, but it was like, the order says I get it when all legal authorities are complete. And so they've not released it to me. So I think that that is an indication that something is still going on. As far as me having direct knowledge of it, no. And as far as them investigating or interviewing as well, certainly the family is cooperative in that manner, if and when asked. Certainly we feel like we have a lot to offer up.
Obviously.
Yes.
Let me ask this question. There are 2 lines of inquiry that we've been reliably informed are underway. An investigation into finances, potential assets that John Paul Miller may have hidden, commingled, perhaps laundered, some have suggested. But then there's also allegations regarding to abuse, harassment, stalking, assault.
Yes.
For other victims.
Mm-hmm.
As those allegations kind of hang out there, obviously we have seen documented in detail in court filings from Mica's family, from her friends, from the first wife of John Paul Miller, who alleged a host of abuse. Would it surprise you if there were those twin paths to this investigation?
Not be surprised at all, and actually hopeful. And as Mica said, God will come and he will take care of everything.
That's true. Let me ask this question. Arguably the most significant component of this story, and I think you would attest to this at your press conference, in the immediate aftermath of one of the first hearings, where, yes, there were some items to discuss about what transpired in the court that day, but the focus of what you talked about, and what I gather from watching the family on social media, one of their main focuses is how to protect other women, or other spouses, other people in relationships, from being victimized in the same way that Mica was. And
Absolutely.
So the hashtag is justice for Mica, but the push on the coercive control legislation seems to be much bigger. Let me ask you this. There have been coercive control reform bills filed in South Carolina. They haven't gotten anywhere. Where do you see this debate going? And let's talk a little bit about that issue and what you see as sort of the key pillars of an effective piece of legislation here in South Carolina?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for asking that, because I think that it is critical. One of the wonderful things that has happened out of this horrible situation is that it has put a ginormous spotlight on this problem. This problem has existed forever. Women, particularly, and I know that men are in the same situation, but let's be honest, it's primarily women. Okay, and it is critical now that this has been brought to light that something be done about it. Because I'll tell you right now, if that bill or if that had been made a law, and if that law had been put into place several years before this happened to Mica, there is no doubt in my mind that there's a possibility she would still be alive. And the reason for that is because every single place that she went to get help, I mean every place that she went to get help, she didn't get the help. She didn't get the help that she needed to escape from that situation. And it's because the laws are not set up. They can actually be abused, and that was happening. So had that been in place, it would have created stumbling blocks to start with. Okay, the police would have had something to look to. Whenever police hear I'm being abused, they say, where are the marks? Okay, they're looking for physical evidence. This is abuse that does not leave marks on your body, but it leaves horrible marks on the psyche, the mind, and self-confidence of a person. And it is difficult for an officer to show up and determine, is this a coercive control situation? And so I believe that people are a little bit hesitant about it, because when you take the items one by one, in and of themselves do not seem to be, something that would be considered illegal in and of itself. And the point is that all of the different types of tactics and examples of coercive control that is outlined in the bill, you have to put them together, and in the totality of the circumstances, pulling all of that together, then appears the crime. So the problem with that is that there may be an opportunity to abuse even that situation, okay? Or that it goes too far, that it crosses the line, that an alleged victim is utilizing that actually for a control tactic reversed. So the way—
How do we prevent that from happening, though? Is there a way to draw the line?
Absolutely. I have a theory. My theory is this. First of all, whenever police officers show up to any place where there's an alleged crime, they investigate, they ask questions, they do that sort of a thing. Usually police officers are going to arrest someone whenever there's, probable cause for the arrest that they can see. Marks on the hand, whatever, the bruise. That is probable cause that they can see, so they can make that arrest. Now, if there's a situation that's much bigger, in other words, like a felony, those require a warrant, okay? So that means that if an officer observes these types of behaviors and says, hey, I'm not sure, but it appears that this may be a coercive control situation, I can't arrest this guy on site, but let me take this information to our local magistrate. And then the magistrate looks at it and determines, compares it to the law that will, hopefully be written one day, compares it to the law and determines whether there's probable cause. More likely than not, that's what that means. More likely than not that there is a crime occurring here. And then they can take that warrant and execute the warrant and pick up the person and arrest them for it. And then at that point, it's going to be up to the solicitor to garner the rest of the evidence, the journals, the patterns, the 19 phone calls to the police, and all the things that have been reported. So then that to me would afford some protection from utilizing the law itself as a tool against someone else. But it's critically important that it goes a step further, Because once someone is arrested for that crime, we'll call it for that crime, I think that the next step that needs to happen is when they get before the bondsman, which they're going to get, and of course once they get out, they are mad, right? So I think that it should be mandatory that anyone who's arrested under coercive control must wear a GPS monitor. No questions about it. It has definitely got to be one part mandatory as part of a bond that's being issued. So I think warrants are the way to do that. They can collect the evidence and have a magistrate determine if that's something that should be executed or not.
And in this case, had some of those statutes been on the books and that probable cause, more likely than not, tell me how that could have impacted what happened to Mica Miller.
Well, in terms of, for instance, whenever you call police, when you're at home in your jurisdiction, usually the police officers, when they're assigned, they're familiar with whatever territory. They also can look up quickly and say, "Oh, have we ever been to this home before?" So they're like, "Oh, they're calling again. They called about this before." So the police officers can pick up a pattern with regard to actual calls. So had that happened, that would have alerted the police officer that there was a bit more going on here. I also think that there would have been an opportunity. Sometimes what police do, or a lot of times what they do, is they try to diffuse a situation when they get there to see, oh, let's see what's happening. Oh, you took her cell phone, you give it back to her, and
Problem solved.
and diffuse the situation. Sometimes what they'll do is encourage. Sir, you need to, can you go stay at your mom's or your best friend's tonight until everything calms down? Or maybe there's a situation where people are, under the influence of alcohol and they're acting out in things that you do whenever you're under alcohol and may not do, sober. So, and then also interviewing her when she would say things like, he's put trackers on me, he's, following me everywhere, he's showing up in places I wouldn't expect him to show up. I'm in the middle of lunch and he turned off my cell phone, and he demoralizes me. He's called me names, he sent me threatening letters, he's incessantly calling me. I've told him over and over and over and over again, stop contacting me. And even after a police officer told him to stop contacting her, he did again. So when she's sitting there verbalizing all of these different things in the story, then the radar goes off into the police officer, who would say, hey, I think this is something that we need to report and put together, do an affidavit and submit it to the judge to see if the judge thinks there's enough here to issue a warrant for his arrest for violating coercive control.
You mentioned earlier that Mica was failed by the system, that she did the things that we want people to do, that we tell people to do, even though it was a conflict for her to do those things in some cases, difficult for her to do, but she nonetheless did those things. If a law is passed that addresses some of these issues, these deficiencies, as you refer in the coercive control arena, if we don't have officers, prosecutors, judges who are going to consistently enforce those statutes, someone who has connections with law enforcement like John Paul Miller, we keep hearing that you don't know how powerful this guy is, the church and these connections he has. How does that play into it?
Well, I think that education is key here. I understand people have sometimes legitimate concerns about the status or the position or the power of someone. If there are resources made available, which they are not in Horry County, it's so embarrassing that there has not been a battered women's shelter here in over a decade, which is just disgusting in my opinion. There's not enough resources. There are actually a couple of websites that a person can go to get some information on what can I do, where do I go, how do I get help. And I actually sat down one evening and I role played for a minute. I said, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm in a coercive control relationship and that he's gone to sleep and or passed out drunk, whatever it is. I got a few minutes to get on the computer that he does not allow me to get on. And I got on there and I tried to do some research real fast. A bunch of junk popped up, and then finally I got to a place where I'm still breathing heavy, thinking he's going to wake up any minute from me clicking on the keys, right? A website pops up and says, I'm basically at the right place, and what can I do? And it was call a number, and also if it had what they called a exit button, because if he walks in and sees I'm on the computer, it's, what are you doing on the computer? What were you looking up? What were you doing? Okay, so you want to have something on the screen that says, I was looking up a recipe, or something. And so that website had an exit button. And when you hit the exit button, it's supposed to take you to a weather station. When I hit the exit button, it went to the Google search bar. So the question then would have been, what were you about to look up? Okay, so it's not working properly. And I really, honestly, I cannot figure out for the life of me why people in general, and especially people who are in power that can make a difference, do not really have any sympathy or have any concern about the gravity of abuse in a home. It's like, it's not happening to me, it doesn't exist. Another thing is like, and I know this is just slightly off topic, but I'm just incensed in how it's not being properly addressed, any form of abuse. There's this, I don't know, they're supposed to have this operation to help with, people who are in human trafficking, sex trafficking and things like that. And the state and the governor, who else, was just applauding themselves and what they're doing. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. I walked through an airport and there was a tiny little sign that said, if you're a victim, call this number, which was a number that no one would ever be able to memorize. Can we get a hashtag 12, a hashtag something that's
quick text
fast,
code or something?
Something that's easy, something, 1-800-HELP me or save me or something. It was the
like
number.
The suicide prevention line?
Yes, it was ridiculous to me. I was like, this is laughable and it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing. That same information, which should have been on the back of every single door of every stall in there. Because, and there should be hot phones on the wall that whenever you walk by, you can grab it real fast and say, help me. And what's going to happen? Boom, cameras are on it. Notice has gone out. Can we get some real help out here? And that's the thing, the people, our government, or the folks who are supposed to be helping, who walk around and pretend that they are and tout that they are. Okay, where's our abuse shelter for women? It's not here. Where are the actual real solid resources? There is a resource booklet that I downloaded, and it gave phone numbers to call. Oh, if you're in an abusive situation, call this number. I called it. It was out of service. Please help me, somebody.
Well, there are powerful elected officials here. I mean, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the South Carolina Senate, Luke Rankin, represents this area. Where is he?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to know where he is. But I'll tell you this. He cried like a baby on Facebook because I called him out for not doing his job.
Senator Rankin.
Excuse me?
Senator Rankin did.
Senator Luke Rankin cried like a baby on Facebook because I called him out. He was, and still is, head of the Judiciary Committee. Mica's law is what I'm going to call it, the Coercive Control Bill, was introduced multiple times, twice in the House and once in the Senate. You get it in the Senate, you got the most powerful senator that's there, head of the judiciary. You think he's got some power? Yes, he's got power. So he failed to use the power to take care of the citizens of the state of South Carolina. He walks around saying that he made a difference or makes a difference, that he's done so much for this county or this state, etc. Please, please, please tell me why. Please tell me why, when there was a request put forward for money to build a battered women's shelter, which we haven't had for 12 years. We refer everybody down to Georgetown. Good luck getting there. Where is the money for that? So there are two very fine gentlemen who have been working on the project, Fred Nesta and Mike King. They themselves, just citizens, they're not involved in government, saw this need, and they have been working diligently to try to raise the money for years, raise enough money to build this shelter. They were successful in finding a wonderful donor, a benefactor who gave land for it. They put together the plans, the drawings, and so forth. Turns out they needed about $3 million. $3 million. So they go before, have someone put forth a request in the budget to have some money, given to them to help do this very, very important thing that helps a lot of people, our community. They were shot down on the $3 million, but they were kind enough to give them $1 million. That's a lot of money. That's great, but we need 3. So fast forward a little bit, and there was a request put in by another local representative for $3 million. The $3 million that was needed for the $6 or $7 million building that's being built for the dog pound, homeless animals. Homeless animals got $3 million while he approved $1 million for abused women and children.
It's a priority problem.
I think you're out of touch. He's out of touch with what's important to the citizens. I like these things about, we're going to, make the roads better and whatever. How about we start with the quality of life inside the home of people? How about we go to that place? How about we put some money into education so that people understand how insidious and how abusive this form of abuse truly is? People cannot wrap their mind around it. When you're living in it, you feel like that it's ghost stuff. It's invisible things that chip away at the person until they become so feeling of no self-worth, total depression, total despair, total of I have to give up and stay here. That happens a lot. Mica, took her a little while. She got empowered. She finally got empowered. And she felt empowered when she walked into this office and sat down with me. She was ready to move forward, and she was upset about what had happened to her. And her eyes were opened. And she said, I didn't know. Didn't know. Now she knows. Now she knows.
When you mentioned earlier about the sacrifice.
Yes.
Do you believe that Mica's sacrifice is what it will take to get these issues, the attention, the legislation, what they deserve?
You know what? I don't know that it will, but I certainly hope that it will. I think that Senator Luke Rankin, instead of, making his little whiny post on Facebook, should have picked up the phone and gave me a call and said, Attorney Ward, Regina, heard what you said. I think you're right. I think this is something that needs to be addressed. I want to be held accountable and say, whatever it is. Maybe it was on there and something happened. I don't know. Maybe there was another priority that took. I don't know. How about give me a call? Stand up and be what you said that you were elected to do. Be strong in this. Stand forward. Go forward. People follow him. Make a difference. While you're elected, it's not about you. It's about us. It's about the people. It's about what we need. And I think that he is out of touch with what general society needs. But come on, be a man and pick up the phone and give me a call. Help me out here. You have the power to do it. And if you don't help me out right here, that tells me everything I need to know about you. And I hope that it tells the rest of the world about him.
Hopefully we'll get some outcomes out of this process. One last question. I've heard that John Paul Miller is not too fond of the Micas law movement, and in fact that he is eagerly attempting to leverage the removal of Mica's name from that. Is that something that's on the table, or is this going to be Mica's law or nothing?
I don't really think that he has any control over that. It's really the legislative body that would determine if it's going to be also known as. It's going to have the coercive control. Of course, what we will be doing is asking the judiciary or the General Assembly to consider adding that to the bill. We want it to be called Mica's Law, not because of just Mica, but because of Mica's situation, and so much national, worldwide attention has been brought to this. When you say the word or the name Mica, what happens right here is the abusive things that she went through. So people will immediately recognize what that is and connect it. So it would not only be, a wonderful, wonderful, tribute to what her life meant here, what it ended up meaning in the end. And also it's, it's already well known. It's a household name. So let's call it what it is.
Absolutely. Attorney Ward, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.